Fellow Americans, over 800 years ago, the Emperor of China arranged a contest to determine who was the most skilled blade fighter in the empire. 3 finalists appeared before the Emperor. The first was a Japanese samurai. He gingerly opened up a small ornate box, and a common housefly flew out and began to buzz around the room. The samurai unsheathed his katana, and with one calculated stroke, cut the housefly into 2 small pieces. The Emperor laughed with approval. Then the Chinese Kung Fu Mandarin stepped up. He also let a fly out of the box, and taking his ornate ceremonial hand axe, he took 2 quick cuts and cut the fly into 4 pieces. The Emperor laughed again. Finally, the rabbi stepped forward. He also opened up a little box, and out flew the fly, buzzing around the room. And with utter concentration as the fly flew past, the rabbi lashed out with lightning speed. The fly made a little yelp and flew around in circles erratically. The Emperor looked disappointed, but the rabbi said, "My dear Emperor, anyone with moderate skill can kill a fly, but a circumcision? Now that takes a rabbi." What has Israel done for us? Israel has been an incubator for anti-terrorism tactics. But before we detail 2 of these tactics, it is only fair to understand that Israel has been the victim of an almost unbroken series of wars, terrorist attacks, and daily hate crimes since its formation in 1947. From the First War of Independence in 1947, the Israelis have been attacked by Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Algeria, Hezbollah, and Hamas, with support from Russia, Iran, and Cuba, in 14 separate wars or conflicts in the last 70 years. The Arabs and the Russian sponsors have killed about 11,000 Israeli soldiers and over 3,500 civilians. Attached is a scrolling list of these wars and conflicts. In response to these unprovoked attacks, Israeli response have been almost exclusively in self-defense in accordance with the just war doctrine. As a result of Israeli victory over the Arab coalition in the 6 Days Wars of 1967, Israel ended up with additional occupied territory known as the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt. Americans practice religious tolerance, so it is uncomfortable for us to discuss religious differences as a key factor in the antagonism between the Jews and Arabs. Yet these factors matter intensely to the participants, so some background information would be helpful. The Arabs are an ethnic group which speak their own language and which is comprised of about 60% Muslims and about 20% Christians. The Arabs outnumber the Jews about 3 to 1 in the occupied territories. In the pre-1967 borders of Israel, the Jews outnumber the Arabs by the same 3 to 1 ratio. If all the occupied territory population and the pre-1967 population was aggregated in a single state, the Arabs and Jews would have almost equal numbers. Thus, to preserve Israel as a Jewish democracy, a 2-state solution has been offered to the Palestinians by the Israelis many times, with the 2 conditions that they stop attacking the Jews and that they agree to an Israeli military presence to prevent hostile aggression. The Arab organizations known as the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, and its successor Hamas have rejected these 2 conditions and instead resorted to terrorism. This is a crucial point. Israel offers real peace and the Palestinian leaders prefer Jewish genocide. Here are some more examples. In 1973, an Egyptian-led Arab coalition invaded Israel in a war called the Yom Kippur War. Despite severe initial defeats at the beginning of the war, Israel, with strong American support, drove the Arab invaders back across the border and won this war. As part of a comprehensive peace treaty signed with Egypt on March 26, 1979, the Sinai Peninsula was given back by Israel to Egypt. President Jimmy Carter, the President of Egypt Anwar Sadat, and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin shared the 1978 Nobel Peace Prize for bringing peace between Israel and Egypt. In this treaty, Egypt received land, the Sinai Peninsula, in exchange for recognizing Israel's right to exist, allowing free passage through the Suez Canal, and ending economic boycotts. The agreement notably made Egypt the first Arab state to recognize Israel. The United States agreed to pay about $1.3 billion a year in foreign aid to Egypt and about $3 billion a year to Israel. Egypt left the Russian sphere of influence and became an ally of the United States. Sounds like a win-win solution for Egypt, Israel, and America, doesn't it? So what was the reaction from the other Arab nations that had joined Egypt in past wars against Israel? Anger, extreme anger. First, Yasser Arafat of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, stated, "Let them sign what they like. False peace will not last." In the inserted video, we can witness the indoctrination of Palestine children as they participate in firing mortars at Israeli civilian populations. The Palestinians are using their children as human shields while attacking the Jews. This illustrates a second point. Not only do the Palestinians hope to bring about Jewish genocide, but they use their own children as human shields. They hate Israel even more than they love their own children. This could be the defining characteristic of barbarism. And if the Jews engage in counter-battery fire, they would kill some brainwashed Palestinian children, and the world would end up blaming the Jews for finishing this fight rather than the Palestinians for starting it. So where is the moral outrage for Palestinian terrorists hiding behind children they secretly hope to martyr? There is no outrage, because the United Nations has over 450 million Arabs who consistently outvote the 14 million Jews. If it weren't for American Security Council vetoes, the Arabs would declare boycotts and a permanent state of war against Israel. Obstructing anti-Semitic United Nations boycotts and deterring aggression are major reasons why Israel needs our support. In addition to the primary goal of the treaty, which is to bring peace, there were secondary consequences. One consequence of the Egyptian and Israeli peace treaty was the shattering of the monolithic Arab coalition seeking to destroy Israel. As related, the PLO and others vowed to continue the fight. The second consequence of the peace treaty was that Egypt was suspended for 10 years by the other Arab countries from the Arab League, an organization created for mutual defense and a common economic market. Arab wrath turned on Egypt with a vengeance. Third, the Arabs held President Anwar Sadat personally responsible for his peaceful conduct. For recognizing Israel's right to exist, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated by the Egyptian Islamic Jihad in 1981. When the Arabs get angry, they don't just debate or protest like Republicans or Democrats. They kill. As in this case, Arab moderates and pragmatists like President Sadat are assassinated in order to preserve the PLO power structure, a tyranny which is built on hatred of the Jews. A violent Palestinian tyranny can more easily justify its oppression if it cloaks its change in the flag of Arab nationalism. Thus, the conflict between Israel and the current Palestine leadership is a conflict between Jewish democracy and violent Arab tyranny. Unfortunately, terrorist actions from the Iranian-backed Shiite Islamic organization Hezbollah and the PLO-derived Sunni Islamic organization Hamas continue to this day. Violent Muslim terrorism, primarily motivated by anti-Semitism, is difficult for a secular and tolerant society like America to truly appreciate. But many Americans don't even try. They evidently belong in Egypt. They live in a state of denial. But as a result of real casualties in an unending series of defensive wars, terrorist attacks, and anti-Semitic hate crimes, the Israelis have been in a persistent state of declared or undeclared war. In a world with limited resources and unforgiving consequences, the concept of triage becomes increasingly necessary. Triage is the idea that you have to be as productive as possible, as quickly as possible, with limited resources. Feel-good measures that don't produce results must be jettisoned for sometimes harsh but realistic solutions. In the real world, results matter more than intentions. And concrete, helpful actions count for more than empathetic words. Triage means saving those you can and ignoring those you cannot save or those who refuse to be saved. Now, with a better understanding of the anti-Semitic genocide being waged against the Jews, we more readily accept the moral necessity and the justification of the tactics that the Jews have taken in self-defense. So to separate the populations of primarily Jewish communities from primarily Arab Muslim communities, the Israelis built a great big wall. A huge wall! Huge! This 500-mile anti-terrorist wall and fence is up to 60 feet high and in some strategic locations has turrets and barbed wire. Tunnel detection equipment is utilized to prevent Hamas from smuggling arms into the occupied territories. How effective has this wall been? This huge wall has facilitated a 90% reduction in Israeli casualties due to terrorism. 90%. The wall works. It reduces terrorism, it prevents smuggling, it separates hostile religious communities. Good walls make good neighbors. This is the first of many lessons that we can learn from Israel. If America wants to reduce illegal immigration, reduce sanctuary city crime, reduce the welfare drain of 11 million illegal immigrants, then we need to build a huge wall. Huge! A big league wall. It's true. So true. What is the second tactic that the Israelis have used in the war on terror? In 1972, terrorists from the Japanese Red Army launched an attack that killed 24 people at Ben Gurion Airport. Since then, Israeli security forces have resorted to ethnic profiling. Ethnic profiling is the use of race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality as grounds for additional questioning. Here's a statistic that you may not have heard before. According to the Huffington Post, 15% of the total U.S. prison population, or approximately 350,000 inmates, are currently Muslims. Yet the total Muslim population in America today is only 0.8%. 0.8%. Thus, the Muslims contribute 18 times as many criminals as their percentage of the population should generate. 18 times! If Muslims are 18 times more likely to commit crimes of violence than the average non-Muslim, then shouldn't we be concentrating our security and law enforcement efforts on those most likely to commit those crimes? Why waste time investigating the population pools of the statistically innocent when radical Islamic terrorists all tend to be men, Arabs, and Muslims? Of course, not all Muslims are terrorists, and not all non-Muslims are peaceful. But I absolutely guarantee you that all Islamic Muslim terrorists are Muslims. On September 11, 2001, we lost 2,996 people killed and over 6,000 wounded in the worst terrorist attacks our country has ever experienced. All of these terrorists were from militant Sunni Muslim sect known as Al-Qaeda. Here's a link to a website detailing all of these radical Muslim terrorist attacks. The politically correct waste valuable resources if they ignore the facts coming from a non-biased scientific analysis of the correlation between violent crime and the religion of the criminal. Triage means making your efforts count, not wasting time and resources trying to please the politically correct PC Gestapo. If Muslims are 18 times more likely to be violent criminals, then law enforcement should be devoting 18 times more effort into investigating Muslims than non-Muslims. That's common sense. With their lives at constant risk, the Israelis have had no problem with ethnic profiling. Consequently, since 1972, there have been no terrorist attacks on planes originating in Israel where this ethnic profiling has been adopted. None. 0 attacks. Using ethnic profiling, they have had a 100% success rate when it comes to terrorism on airplanes. However, here in America, the American Civil Liberties Union would rather put your life at risk rather than identify Muslims for additional screening. Yet Israel has proven that ethnic profiling saves a lot of time for innocent folk and puts suspect populations more statistically likely to commit terror under a more thorough investigation. Despite liberal misinformation to the contrary, ethnic profiling works. But if the Israeli success doesn't persuade you, then let me ask you a common sense question. Which of these two individuals do you think possesses a bigger threat as a fellow passenger boarding your airplane? If you had to choose, wouldn't you rather let the one on the bottom go through security in half the time and spend that time doing a more thorough background check on that angry-looking man? If the normal security check at the airport is 40 minutes, wouldn't you feel safer if security spent only 20 minutes talking to the woman and spent that extra 20 minutes doing a security clearance vetting on the anger management candidate? Now let's imagine the PC Gestapo is not watching, and you will be flying on the same plane as these two. And let's imagine that there are no unlimited resources in the world, and that terrorists do hijack planes and even set their shoes on fire. In other words, let's imagine that we live in America. Now, should both of these two be treated with the same exhaustive investigation and internal cavity body probes, or could we perhaps save one of them some of the hassle and concentrate our vetting on the one most likely to commit violence? So truthfully, God is watching, Which of these two passengers would you prefer get some extra special security attention to guarantee you a safe flight? The next time one of your liberal friends complains about the long security checks at the airport, suggest that maybe ethnic profiling is the answer. And then watch him go apoplectic at your apostasy. We began this discussion determined to show that for the last 70 years the Israelis have been in a state of declared and undeclared war. The casualties that they have experienced in these wars justifies and requires a higher standard for security precautions, like the 500-mile wall and the use of ethnic profiling. We briefly summarized the numerous wars of aggression initiated by the Arabs and continued first by the PLO and then by Hamas. We showed that Israel was justified in using ethnic profiling and constructing the wall because these tactics were necessary for its own self-defense against Arab tyranny. We illustrated that the enemy they defend against is a violent Arab tyranny that cares only about preserving its own power by stoking anti-Semitism. Some Arab extremists, like Hamas, are willing to use their own children as human shields as they fire off mortar rounds at Israeli civilians. And any moderate Arab leaders like Anwar Sadat who attempt peace with Israel are assassinated. Against this barbarism, Israel has found two tactics that work wonders in self-preservation: the anti-terrorism wall and ethnic profiling. In part 2 of this series, we will explore additional tactics that the Israelis employ and the additional benefits that their alliance has brought to the United States. As always, I encourage you to continue to exercise good judgment, for our actions do have consequences, both in this life and in the next.